I was halfway through backing my boat trailer down the private launch ramp when I heard the shrieking that would turn my peaceful Saturday morning into the most satisfying legal battle of my life. "Stop right there. You cannot use that boat launch. This is a violation of community standards." I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw her marching down the gravel path like she owned the place. She was everything you would expect. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair with dark roots showing, wearing what looked like a tennis outfit despite the fact that our HOA did not even have tennis courts, and carrying a binder that I knew contained every petty complaint she had filed in the past year. Her name was Sharon Whitmore, and she was the self-appointed enforcer of the Lakeview Heights Homeowners Association in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I put my truck in park and stepped out, keeping my expression neutral. The morning sun was just burning off the mist over the lake, and I had been looking forward to getting out on the water before the crowds showed up. My boat, a modest 22-foot fishing vessel, sat patiently on the trailer behind my Ford F-150. "Good morning, Sharon," I said, forcing politeness into my voice. "Do not good morning me, Michael Chen. You know very well that boat launches are restricted to designated hours, and today is not even an approved launch day according to the community calendar." She flipped open her binder with the flourish of a prosecutor presenting damning evidence. I took a deep breath. This was not the first time Sharon had confronted me about something, but it was definitely the most absurd. 6 months ago, she had called code enforcement because my grass was allegedly a 1/4 inch too long. 3 months ago, she had left a formal complaint in my mailbox because my trash bins were visible from the street for approximately 45 minutes past the pickup time. Last month, she had tried to fine me because the paint color of my front door was supposedly not on the approved list, even though it was literally colonial blue, option number 7 on the community guidelines. "Sharon, I appreciate your dedication to the community," I started, choosing my words carefully, "but I am not violating any rules. I am launching my boat from my own property." Her face turned a shade of red that clashed terribly with her hot pink polo shirt. "This is community waterfront property. It says so right in the bylaws. Section 12, Paragraph 4 clearly states that all waterfront access is communal and subject to HOA regulations." "That applies to the community beach area," I explained, gesturing to the small sandy patch about 100 yards north of where we stood. "This particular stretch of shoreline, including this boat launch, is part of my property. I own it." Sharon laughed, actually laughed, like I had just told her the most ridiculous joke she had ever heard. "That is impossible. The developer retained all waterfront rights when these homes were built. Everyone knows that. Everyone is wrong," I said simply. "When I purchased this property 3 years ago, the waterfront footage was explicitly included in the deed. I own everything from my back fence line down to 30 feet past the water's edge into the lake itself." She snapped her binder shut. "I am calling the police." "You are trespassing on community property, and I will not stand for this flagrant disregard of our rules," I shrugged. "Go ahead." I honestly expected her to back down, to maybe stomp off and stew about it, or perhaps to demand I show her documentation. Instead, Sharon pulled out her cell phone and actually dialed. I heard her speaking in that elevated, frantic tone that certain people use when they want to sound like they are in genuine distress. "Yes, hello. I need to report a trespassing situation at 4782 Lakeshore Drive in Lake Geneva. There is a man here who is using community property without authorization, and he is refusing to leave. Yes, I will stay on the line. Yes, it is an active situation. He has a truck and a boat, and he is damaging community resources." I leaned against my truck and waited. This was going to be interesting. The morning was warming up nicely, and a light breeze rippled across the lake's surface. A few early morning kayakers paddled by in the distance, probably wondering what the commotion was about. Sharon stood about 15 feet away, phone still pressed to her ear, watching me like I might suddenly make a break for it. I pulled out my own phone and texted my wife, Jennifer, who was visiting her sister in Milwaukee for the weekend. You won't believe this. Sharon called the cops on me for launching the boat. Her response came back almost immediately. What? Are you serious? Dead serious. She thinks the launch ramp is HOA property. Oh boy, she is about to learn a very expensive lesson. Jennifer knew the full story because she had been with me during the property purchase. We had specifically sought out a home with actual waterfront ownership, not just access. Most properties in Lakeview Heights had been developed with communal waterfront areas, which was fine for people who wanted the amenities without the maintenance. But I had grown up on lakes, spent every summer of my childhood fishing with my grandfather, and I wanted my own piece of shoreline. When our realtor had shown us this property, with its private launch ramp and actual deeded ownership of the waterfront, we had jumped on it despite the higher price tag. The property had an interesting history. It had been part of the original estate that predated the housing development. When the developer bought the land to create Lakeview Heights, this particular parcel had been carved out and sold separately to retain its waterfront rights. The previous owners, an elderly couple named the Harrisons, had maintained it for 40 years before deciding to downsize. They had been meticulous about preserving the property boundaries, and had even fought off an attempt by the HOA about 15 years ago to claim the shoreline through adverse possession. All of this was thoroughly documented in the title search, the property survey, the deed, and about 6 different legal filings from various disputes over the years. I had copies of everything in a fireproof safe in my home office. 20 minutes later, a Lake Geneva Police Department cruiser pulled up to the street entrance of my driveway. A young officer stepped out, looking like he would rather be anywhere else. His nameplate read Kowalski, and he approached with the cautious demeanor of someone who had already identified this as a civil issue that he wanted no part of. "Morning, folks," Officer Kowalski said. "Got a call about a trespassing situation." Sharon immediately launched into her rehearsed speech. "Yes, officer, thank you for coming so quickly. This man, Michael Chen, is unlawfully using community waterfront property to launch his boat. The Lakeview Heights HOA has very clear restrictions on waterfront usage, and he is in direct violation of our community bylaws. I am the HOA compliance coordinator, and I have documented evidence of previous violations by Mr. Chen, establishing a pattern of disregard for community rules." Officer Kowalski turned to me. "Sir, what is your response to this?" "This is my property," I said calmly. "I own this section of waterfront. It was included in my property purchase, and I have all the documentation to prove it. The HOA has no jurisdiction over my private shoreline." Sharon sputtered. "That is absolutely false. I have been the compliance coordinator for 8 years, and I know every inch of community property." "Ma'am," Officer Kowalski said, holding up a hand, "do you have documentation showing this is HOA property?" "It is in the bylaws." Section 12, paragraph 4, "And sir, do you have documentation showing you own this land?" "I do. It is inside my house. Would you like me to get it, please?" I walked up the sloped lawn to my house, a custom-built craftsman-style home with a wraparound porch that Jennifer and I both loved. Inside, I went straight to my office, opened the safe, and pulled out the property file. I grabbed the deed, the survey map, the title insurance policy, and for good measure, the legal correspondence from the HOA's failed attempt to claim the property in 2010. When I returned, Sharon was still talking at the officer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Here you go," I said, handing the documents to Officer Kowalski. He spread them out on the hood of my truck and began reading. His expression shifted from neutral to understanding pretty quickly. He studied the survey map carefully, looking from the document to the physical landscape and back again. "Mr. Chen, this survey shows your property line extends to 30 feet into the lake." "That is correct. Riparian rights were included in the original estate property." "It is all documented in the deed," Officer Kowalski turned to Sharon. "Ma'am, these documents appear to be in order. This does seem to be private property." "That is impossible." Sharon's voice went up an octave. "I demand you arrest him for trespassing and for presenting false documents." "Ma'am, I am not going to arrest someone for using their own property. These are legal documents properly notarized and filed with the county." "Then I want to file a complaint. You are not doing your job, I pay taxes, and I expect the police to enforce the law." Officer Kowalski's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, this is a civil property matter. If you believe there is a legitimate dispute over property boundaries, you need to pursue that through civil court, not through police enforcement. Based on the documentation I have seen, Mr. Chen has every right to be here. This is outrageous. I will be contacting your supervisor. I will be filing a formal complaint with the police department. You are certainly free to do that, ma'am." Officer Kowalski handed my documents back to me. "Mr. Chen, you are all set." "Sorry for the inconvenience." "No problem at all, officer. I appreciate you taking the time." As Officer Kowalski walked back to his cruiser, Sharon stood there trembling with rage. Her face had gone from red to purple, and I was genuinely concerned she might have a stroke. "This is not over," she hissed. "The HOA board will hear about this. We will take action." "Sharon, I really think you should let this go. I have been nothing but patient with all your complaints, but this is getting ridiculous. I own this property. That is a fact. No amount of HOA meetings is going to change it. We will see about that." She stormed off toward her own house, which was 4 doors down from mine. I watched her go, then shook my head and returned to my truck. The whole confrontation had killed my desire to go fishing, but I was not about to let Sharon think she had won. I finished backing the boat down the ramp, launched it properly, parked the trailer in its designated spot on my property, and spent the next 4 hours out on Lake Geneva, catching absolutely nothing but enjoying every minute of it. When I returned home that afternoon, there was a formal notice from the HOA taped to my front door. I pulled it down and read it while standing on my porch. Notice of violation. The homeowner at 4782 Lakeshore Drive is hereby notified of the following violations of Lakeview Heights HOA covenants and bylaws: unauthorized use of community waterfront property, operation of watercraft during restricted hours, failure to obtain proper permits for boat launch activities. Fine, $500 payable within 30 days. Continued violations will result in additional fines and possible legal action. Signed, Sharon Whitmore, Compliance Coordinator. I crumpled up the notice and tossed it in my recycling bin. Then I went inside, scanned all my property documents, and sent them via email to Thomas Bradley, the attorney who had handled our property purchase. I explained the situation and asked him to prepare a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA. Thomas called me back within an hour. "Michael, this is absurd. You have ironclad documentation of your property ownership. The HOA has absolutely no standing to fine you for using your own land." "I know that, and you know that, but Sharon Whitmore apparently does not care about minor details like property deeds and legal boundaries. Let me draft a letter. I will make it very clear that any attempt to collect these fines or restrict your property use will result in legal action against the HOA for harassment and tortious interference. I will also request that they formally acknowledge your property boundaries and cease any further complaints related to your waterfront usage." Perfect. How much is this going to cost me? For the letter, $250. If they push back and we have to take further action, we can discuss it. But honestly, once they see this letter on law firm letterhead with proper citations and legal precedent, they usually back down pretty quickly. Let's do it. Thomas had the letter drafted and sent within 2 business days. I received a copy via email, and it was beautifully written. It laid out the complete history of the property, cited the relevant Wisconsin statutes regarding riparian rights and property boundaries, included references to the 2010 legal dispute that the HOA had lost, and made it absolutely clear that any further attempts to interfere with my property rights would result in immediate legal action seeking damages and attorney fees. I expected that to be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days after the HOA received Thomas's letter, I received a notice that an emergency HOA board meeting had been called to address serious community concerns regarding waterfront property boundaries and member compliance. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 o'clock in the evening at the community clubhouse. Jennifer and I discussed whether I should attend. She had returned from Milwaukee and was fully caught up on the drama. "Part of me thinks you should skip it," she said over dinner. "Why give them the satisfaction? You have already established your legal position." "But part of me wants to see what they are planning," I countered. "If they are going to try something else, I would rather know about it." "That is fair. Want me to come with you? Would you mind?" I could use the moral support. "Are you kidding? I would not miss this for anything. Sharon Whitmore tried to fine us last year for having unauthorized decorative elements in our front yard. You know what she was referring to, the wreath on our door, our Christmas wreath. She said it was not on the approved decoration list." I had forgotten about that. Sharon had actually sent us a formal complaint about our holiday decorations, claiming they violated some obscure rule about maintaining uniform aesthetic standards. We had ignored it, and eventually she had backed off, probably because trying to ban Christmas wreaths would have turned the entire neighborhood against her. Tuesday evening arrived, and Jennifer and I walked down to the clubhouse together. It was a nice evening, warm for late spring, with the sun just starting to set behind the trees. The clubhouse was a modest building with a large meeting room, a small kitchen, and a patio that overlooked the community beach area. About 30 people were already there when we arrived, which was unusual. Normal HOA meetings drew maybe 10 people on a good day. Sharon was at the front of the room, standing beside a presentation board with what appeared to be maps and documents pinned to it. She saw me enter and her eyes narrowed, but she did not say anything. The HOA board president, a retired accountant named Robert Gunderson, was sitting at the head table with the other board members. Vice President Patricia Morrison, Treasurer Donald Hughes, and Secretary Linda Yamamoto. Robert called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is unusual, calling an emergency meeting, but we have a significant issue that requires community input and board action. Sharon, would you like to present the situation?" Sharon stood up and launched into what could only be described as a performance. "Thank you, Robert. As many of you know, I serve as the compliance coordinator for our wonderful community, a role I take very seriously because I believe that maintaining our standards is what keeps our property values high and our neighborhood beautiful. Recently, I discovered a serious situation that threatens the very foundation of our community structure." She gestured dramatically at her presentation board. "One of our residents has been using community waterfront property for personal boat launching activities. When I attempted to enforce our community bylaws, this resident became hostile and confrontational. He even called the police, wasting valuable law enforcement resources. Furthermore, this resident has made claims that he owns waterfront property, which directly contradicts our community structure and the developer's original intentions." I raised my hand. "Point of order. Can I respond to these accusations?" Robert looked uncomfortable. "Michael, let Sharon finish her presentation, and then we will open the floor for discussion." Sharon continued. "I have researched our community bylaws extensively, and I have prepared a motion for the board to consider. I propose that we take legal action to formally establish the boundaries of our community waterfront property and to prevent any individual homeowner from claiming exclusive access to our shared resources. This is not about one person. This is about protecting the rights of all Lakeview Heights residents." She sat down to scattered applause from a few people who clearly had no idea what was actually going on. Robert cleared his throat. "Thank you, Sharon. Michael, you wanted to respond." I stood up and Jennifer gave my hand a supportive squeeze. Yes, thank you. First, I want to address the characterization of events. I did not call the police. Sharon did. She called them on me for using my own property. Second, I did not make claims about owning waterfront property. I do own waterfront property. It is not a claim. It is a legal fact, documented in my property deed, my title insurance, and multiple court filings. I pulled out copies of my documents and held them up. I have here my property survey, which clearly shows my lot boundaries extending into the lake. I have my deed, which explicitly includes riparian rights. I have correspondence from 2010 showing that the HOA attempted to claim this exact property before and lost that legal dispute. And I have a letter from my attorney that was sent to this board last week, laying all of this out in detail. Murmurs spread through the room. Several people were clearly hearing about this for the first time. Patricia Morrison, the vice president, spoke up. Michael, did the board receive this letter from your attorney? They should have. It was sent to the HOA's registered address and to Robert's email. Robert shifted uncomfortably. I did receive a letter. I forwarded it to the board members for review. And, Patricia pressed. What did the letter say? It made legal claims about property boundaries, Robert said vaguely. I wanted to bring it before the full board before responding. The letter did not make claims, I said firmly. It stated facts that are easily verifiable through public records at the Walworth County Register of Deeds office. Anyone can go look this up. My property boundaries are not a matter of opinion or interpretation. They are surveyed, documented, and legally established. Sharon jumped to her feet. This is exactly the kind of hostile, aggressive behavior I was talking about. He is trying to bully the board into accepting his version of events. Sharon, sit down, Patricia said sharply. Michael, can you show us these documents? I walked forward and handed copies to the board members. I had anticipated this moment and had prepared extra sets of everything. The board members huddled together, examining the papers. I saw Patricia's eyebrows rise as she studied the survey map. Donald, the treasurer, pulled out his phone and appeared to be looking something up. After several minutes of discussion, Patricia addressed the room. This survey appears to be legitimate. It is properly stamped and certified, and this deed is filed with the county. But how is that possible? Sharon demanded. The developer sold all these homes with communal waterfront access. That was the whole point of Lakeview Heights. Most of the homes, yes, I said, but not all of them. My property was originally part of a separate estate that predated the development. When the developer bought the land to create this subdivision, this particular lot was sold separately with its existing property rights intact. The previous owners, the Harrisons, maintained those rights for 40 years. I remember the Harrisons, Linda Yamamoto said quietly. She was the secretary and had been in the neighborhood longer than anyone else on the board. They had that boat dock and they used to launch their fishing boat all the time. Nobody ever said anything about it because everyone knew it was their property. Exactly, I said. This is not new. This is not something I invented. I simply purchased a property with pre-existing rights that have been in place for decades. Donald looked up from his phone. I am looking at the county GIS maps right now, and it does show a different property line for 4782 Lakeshore Drive. It extends into the lake just like Michael's survey shows. Sharon's face was turning purple again. This is a conspiracy. The county records must be wrong. We need to hire our own surveyor. Sharon, that is enough, Patricia said firmly. The evidence is clear. Michael owns his waterfront property and the HOA has no authority over it. But what about the fine? Sharon sputtered. He owes the HOA $500 for violations. There was no violation, Patricia said. Therefore, there is no fine. Michael, on behalf of the board, I apologize for this situation. The fine will be voided, and we will send you a formal acknowledgement of your property boundaries. Thank you, Patricia. I appreciate that. Robert Gunderson looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I think we need to table Sharon's motion. There is clearly no legal basis for it. I agree, Donald said. Motion to table indefinitely. Second, Linda added, all in favor. 3 hands went up. Robert hesitated, then slowly raised his hand as well. Sharon stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. This is outrageous. You are all cowards. I have served this community for 8 years, and this is how you treat me. By siding with someone who is clearly trying to steal community resources. Sharon, nobody is stealing anything, Patricia said with impressive patience. Michael owns his property legally and legitimately. We cannot take action against someone for using their own land. Fine, then I quit. I quit the compliance coordinator position. I quit the beautification committee. You can all deal with the chaos when people start doing whatever they want. She grabbed her binder and stormed out of the clubhouse. The room fell silent for a moment, and then someone in the back started clapping. A few others joined in, and I realized that Sharon had not been popular with most of the neighborhood. Her reign of petty complaints and arbitrary fine threats had apparently worn thin with a lot of people. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to shake my hand and thank me. A guy named Pete from 2 streets over told me that Sharon had fined him 3 times in 1 year for various ridiculous infractions, including having his trash bins out 15 minutes too early. A woman named Maria said Sharon had tried to force her to remove a bird feeder because it was not on the approved landscaping list. Jennifer and I walked home under the stars, and she looped her arm through mine. Well, that was satisfying. It really was. I almost feel bad about it. Do not. Sharon needed to learn that she cannot just bully people into compliance, especially when she is completely wrong about the facts. I thought that was the end of the saga. Once again, I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from a law firm in Chicago. The return address showed Whitmore and Associates, and my stomach sank before I even opened it. Inside was a formal legal complaint filed by Sharon Whitmore as an individual against me, alleging fraud, property encroachment, and intentional interference with community property rights. The complaint sought damages of $50,000, attorney fees, and a court order forcing me to cease using disputed waterfront property pending a full legal determination of boundaries. I immediately called Thomas Bradley. She actually filed a lawsuit. Thomas sounded incredulous. Against you personally? That is what it looks like. Is Whitmore and Associates her firm? Let me look them up. Hold on, I heard typing in the background. Oh, this is interesting. Whitmore and Associates is run by Richard Whitmore. I am guessing that is her husband or brother. It is a small firm, mostly does business contract work and some real estate litigation. So she got her relative to file a frivolous lawsuit against me? That is exactly what she did. Michael, I am going to be blunt with you. This lawsuit is not just frivolous, it is borderline sanctionable. She has no standing, no evidence, and no legal basis for any of her claims. If we respond properly, we can not only get this dismissed but potentially recover our attorney fees and maybe even file a malicious prosecution claim. What is this going to cost me? Let me think about this strategically. If we just respond with a motion to dismiss, maybe $2,000. But if you want to send a stronger message and potentially recoup your costs, we could file a counterclaim for harassment, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. That is more involved, probably $5,000 to $7,000 upfront, but if we win, you could recover all of it plus damages. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to just make this go away as cheaply as possible. But another part of me was tired of Sharon's bullying and thought that she needed to face real consequences for wasting everyone's time and money. Let's do the counterclaim, I said. I am done being patient with this woman. You are sure it is going to get messy? I am sure. She called the cops on me for using my own property. She tried to fine me $500 for something I had every right to do. She lied about me at an HOA meeting, and now she is filing a baseless lawsuit through her family member's law firm. Someone needs to hold her accountable. All right. I will draft a response with a counterclaim. This is going to be interesting. Over the next month, the legal filings went back and forth. Thomas filed our response, which included a detailed motion to dismiss with prejudice, arguing that Sharon's claims were completely without merit and violated Wisconsin's rules against frivolous litigation. We also filed a counterclaim seeking damages for harassment, abuse of process, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We asked for compensatory damages of $20,000, attorney fees, and a permanent injunction preventing Sharon from filing any further complaints or legal actions related to my property. Richard Whitmore, Sharon's attorney, responded with an opposition that was surprisingly weak. It basically repeated Sharon's original claims without providing any actual evidence or legal support. Thomas was thrilled. "This is even better than I hoped," he told me during a phone call. "They have nothing." Their entire argument is that Sharon believes the property should be community-owned, therefore it is. That is not how property law works. The case was assigned to Judge Catherine Morrison in the Walworth County Circuit Court. We had a preliminary hearing scheduled for early September, about 3 months after Sharon had initially confronted me at the boat launch. During those 3 months, life in Lakeview Heights became uncomfortable. Sharon had apparently told her version of events to anyone who would listen, painting me as a con artist who had somehow tricked the county into filing false property records. A few people believed her, mostly her close friends on the beautification committee. But most of the neighborhood had either seen the documentation at the HOA meeting or had heard about it, and they understood that Sharon was in the wrong. The tension came to a head at the 4th of July community picnic. Jennifer and I almost skipped it, but we decided that we were not going to let Sharon drive us into hiding. We showed up with a pasta salad and some burgers to grill, determined to enjoy the day. Sharon was already there, holding court near the dessert table with her group of loyalists. When she saw me, she made a show of turning her back and speaking loudly enough for me to hear. "Some people have no shame. Filing false lawsuits, forging documents, wasting the court's time. I hope justice is served." Jennifer grabbed my arm. "Ignore her. She is trying to provoke you, I know. But it is really hard." We set up at a picnic table on the opposite side of the community beach area. Several neighbors came over to chat with us, carefully avoiding the subject of the lawsuit. Pete brought his kids over, and they asked if they could go fishing off my dock sometime. I told them they were welcome anytime, which earned me a grateful look from Pete. Around noon, Robert Gunderson approached me nervously. "Michael, can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure, Robert. What is up?" He looked around to make sure Sharon was not within earshot. "I wanted to apologize personally for how the board handled the initial complaint. I should have looked into the property records before agreeing to that emergency meeting. Sharon was very persistent, and I took her word that she had researched everything." "I appreciate that, Robert." The board has actually been discussing removing Sharon from all her committee positions, not just compliance coordinator. She resigned from that, but she is still technically on the beautification committee and the architectural review committee. After what happened with you, several other homeowners have come forward with complaints about her behavior. She has been using her positions to harass people she personally does not like. That does not surprise me at all. We are going to vote on it at the next regular board meeting. I wanted to give you a heads up in case Sharon tries to blame you for that too. Thanks for the warning. True to Robert's word, at the July HOA board meeting, Sharon was formally removed from all committee positions by a unanimous vote. She showed up to the meeting and delivered a 20-minute rant about betrayal and corruption before storming out. 3 families applauded after she left. The preliminary hearing in September was almost anticlimactic. Judge Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her early 60s who had clearly read all the filings and was not impressed with Sharon's case. "Mr. Whitmore," she addressed Richard, "I have reviewed your client's complaint, and I have reviewed Mr. Chen's response and counterclaim. I have also taken the liberty of examining the property records filed with Walworth County. Can you explain to me what legal basis your client has for claiming an interest in Mr. Chen's property?" Richard Whitmore stood up, looking uncomfortable. Your Honor, my client's position is that the property boundaries are unclear and that there has been a long-standing understanding in the Lakeview Heights community that all waterfront access is communal. Understanding is not the same as legal ownership, Counselor. Does your client have any documentation supporting her claim to this property? She has the HOA bylaws, which specify that waterfront areas are community resources. HOA bylaws cannot override property deeds, Mr. Whitmore. Surely you know that. Does your client have any actual evidence that Mr. Chen's deed is invalid or fraudulent? We believe that further investigation is warranted, Your Honor. Judge Morrison looked at Thomas. Mr. Bradley, do you have anything to add? Only that we would ask the court to dismiss Mrs. Whitmore's complaint with prejudice and to award attorney fees to my client. This lawsuit never should have been filed. Every piece of evidence supports Mr. Chen's ownership of his waterfront property. Mrs. Whitmore had access to all of this information before filing her complaint, yet she proceeded anyway. This is a textbook case of abuse of process. Judge Morrison nodded. I am inclined to agree. Mr. Whitmore, I am dismissing your client's complaint with prejudice. The property records are clear and unambiguous. Mr. Chen owns the disputed waterfront property, and Mrs. Whitmore has no legal claim to it. As for the counterclaim, I am going to order mediation before this proceeds any further. Mrs. Whitmore, if you are present, I strongly encourage you to settle this matter before it costs you significantly more money. Sharon was sitting in the gallery, and she stood up abruptly. Your Honor, this is a miscarriage of justice. That man has falsified documents and bribed county officials. Judge Morrison's expression went ice cold. Mrs. Whitmore, you are dangerously close to contempt of court. Those are serious accusations, and you have provided exactly zero evidence to support them. If you make those statements outside this courtroom, you could be opening yourself up to additional defamation claims. I suggest you sit down and listen to your attorney. Sharon sat down, but her face was bright red, and I could see her shaking with rage even from across the courtroom. The mediation was scheduled for October. In the meantime, life went on. I continued to use my boat launch regularly, often taking my nephew out fishing when he visited from Madison. Jennifer and I hosted a dock party in late August, inviting several of our neighbors. It was a beautiful evening, and we grilled fish that we had caught earlier in the day, drank cold beer, and watched the sun set over Lake Geneva. Sharon's house was visible in the distance, and I saw her curtains twitch several times as she presumably watched us enjoying our private waterfront property. The mediation session took place at Thomas's law office in downtown Lake Geneva. Sharon attended with Richard Whitmore, and they both looked unhappy to be there. The mediator was a retired judge named Harold Thompson who had a reputation for being fair but firm. Judge Thompson started by laying out the basic facts. Mrs. Whitmore, I have reviewed all the filings in this case, and I want to be honest with you. You have no legal standing for your original complaint. Mr. Chen owns his property. That is not in dispute. What we are here to discuss is your potential liability for his counterclaim. I have done nothing wrong, Sharon said stiffly. I was protecting community interests. By calling the police on someone for using their own property, by filing a lawsuit with no legal basis, by making public statements accusing Mr. Chen of fraud and bribery, he should not own that property. It should belong to the community. Your opinion about what should be is irrelevant, Mrs. Whitmore. We are dealing with what is. And what is, according to legally filed and recorded documents, is that Mr. Chen owns 30 feet of lakefront property including a boat launch. Thomas spoke up. Judge Thompson, my client is willing to settle this matter under specific terms. We are seeking full reimbursement of attorney fees, which currently total $6,200. We are also seeking a formal written apology to be provided to Mr. Chen and Reed at the next Lakeview Heights HOA meeting. Finally, We are seeking a permanent injunction preventing Mrs. Whitmore from filing any further complaints, legal actions, or HOA violations against Mr. Chen related to his waterfront property use. Richard Whitmore shook his head. Those terms are excessive. We might consider reimbursing a portion of attorney fees, but my client will not be humiliated at an HOA meeting, and we cannot agree to an injunction that limits her rights as an HOA member. Her rights as an HOA member do not include harassing other members with frivolous complaints, Thomas countered. Mr. Chen has been more than patient. He has documented evidence of repeated harassment going back over a year. This is not an isolated incident. The mediation went on for 3 hours. Sharon was rigid and defensive throughout, refusing to acknowledge that she had done anything wrong. Richard seemed increasingly frustrated with his client, at one point actually suggesting that they speak privately in another room. When they returned, he looked defeated. We can offer $3,000 for partial attorney fees. That is our best and final offer. Thomas looked at me and I shook my head slightly. I had not come this far to accept a partial settlement that did not actually resolve anything. We decline, Thomas said. We will see you in court. The trial was scheduled for December. In the weeks leading up to it, Thomas prepared extensively. We had multiple preparation sessions where he walked me through likely questions and cross-examination. He also subpoenaed records from the HOA showing Sharon's pattern of filing complaints against various homeowners, which helped establish the harassment pattern we were alleging. We also deposed Sharon, which was an experience I would not forget. She was combative from the start, refusing to give straight answers to even basic questions. When Thomas asked her why she had called the police on me, she went into a 10-minute rant about community standards and property values. When he asked her if she had examined my property deed before filing her lawsuit, she admitted she had not. So you filed a lawsuit claiming Mr. Chen did not own his property without ever actually verifying the ownership records. I did not need to verify them. Everyone in the neighborhood knows that Waterfront is communal. But you were wrong about that, were you not? I was not wrong. The system is wrong. That exchange made it into our trial brief as an example of Sharon's unreasonable behavior. The trial itself was held over 2 days in mid-December. The courtroom was small, and Judge Morrison made it clear from the start that she expected professional behavior from everyone involved. Thomas presented our case methodically. He entered my property deed into evidence, along with the survey, the title insurance policy, and the historical records showing the property's lineage from the original estate through the Harrisons to me. He called me to the stand to describe the boat launch incident and the pattern of complaints from Sharon. Mr. Chen, how did you feel when Mrs. Whitmore called the police on you for using your own boat launch? I was frustrated and honestly a bit humiliated. I had neighbors watching while a police officer examined my property documents like I might be some kind of criminal. It felt like a power play, like she was trying to intimidate me into compliance even though she had no authority over my property. Thomas also called Patricia Morrison, the HOA vice president, who testified about the emergency board meeting and Sharon's history of aggressive enforcement actions. Has the HOA received complaints about Mrs. Whitmore's behavior from other homeowners? Yes, we have received at least 15 formal complaints in the past year alone. Most of them involve what residents feel were petty or arbitrary fine threats for minor issues. Richard Whitmore's cross-examination was weak. He tried to suggest that I had somehow misled the county about my property boundaries, but he had no evidence to support that theory. He tried to paint Sharon as a dedicated community volunteer who was just trying to maintain standards, but Patricia's testimony about the multiple complaints against her undermined that narrative. When Sharon took the stand in her own defense, things went downhill fast. Thomas was surgical in his cross-examination. Mrs. Whitmore, when you called the police on Mr. Chen, had you examined his property deed? No, but I knew the community structure. So you did not verify the actual legal documents before calling the police? I did not need to. When Officer Kowalski showed you Mr. Chen's deed and survey, what did you do? I told him they must be fake. Did you have any basis for that accusation? It just did not make sense that he would own waterfront property. Your personal opinion about what made sense was more important to you than legal documents. I was protecting the community. Thomas paused, letting that answer hang in the air. Mrs. Whitmore, after the HOA board reviewed Mr. Chen's documents and confirmed that he owned his property, did you apologize to him? No, why would I? Did you drop your complaints against him? No, I filed a lawsuit because the board was not doing their job, even though the legal evidence clearly showed you were wrong. I was not wrong, Judge Morrison actually intervened at that point. Mrs. Whitmore, the court has seen the property records. Mr. Chen owns his waterfront property. That is a fact, not an opinion. Do you understand that? Sharon crossed her arms. I understand that the system has failed to protect community interests, Your Honor. The trial concluded on the second day, and Judge Morrison said she would issue a written decision within 30 days. Thomas was cautiously optimistic. She destroyed herself on the stand. Did you see the judge's face when Sharon refused to acknowledge the property records? That was a disaster for their side. 2 weeks before Christmas, the decision arrived. It was a complete victory. Judge Morrison found that Sharon's lawsuit had been frivolous and filed in bad faith, that her actions constituted harassment and abuse of process, and that her behavior had caused me genuine emotional distress. The court awarded me full attorney fees of $7,800, which had grown due to the trial costs. The court also awarded me $10,000 in compensatory damages and issued a permanent injunction preventing Sharon from filing any complaints or legal actions against me related to my waterfront property without first obtaining court approval. The written decision included some particularly pointed language from Judge Morrison. Mrs. Whitmore's actions in this matter reflect a troubling pattern of behavior that prioritizes her personal opinions over legal reality. Despite being presented with clear, unambiguous evidence that Mr. Chen owns his waterfront property, Mrs. Whitmore has persistently refused to acknowledge this fact. Her decision to file a lawsuit without conducting even basic due diligence regarding the underlying property records suggests either profound negligence or intentional harassment. The court finds the latter to be more likely given Mrs. Whitmore's admission that she believed the legal system was wrong and her stated intention to force Mr. Chen to cease using his property. Such behavior cannot be tolerated in a civil society that depends on respect for property rights and legal documentation. Thomas called me as soon as he received the decision. Michael, you need to read this. The judge eviscerated her. I read through it twice, still barely believing what I was seeing. Does this mean it is really over? Unless she appeals, which would be insane given how badly she lost. She owes you $17,800, and if she violates the injunction, she could face contempt charges. Sharon did not appeal. She did, however, refuse to pay the judgment. We had to file a motion to compel payment, and eventually her attorney convinced her that continuing to fight would only make things worse. In late February, nearly a year after the initial boat launch incident, I received a check for $17,800 from Sharon Whitmore. There was no apology. No acknowledgement that she had been wrong. Just a check with the memo line left blank. But something else happened that felt like a final victory. In early March, Robert Gunderson called me with some news. Michael, I wanted to let you know that Sharon and her husband are selling their house. They are moving out of Lakeview Heights. Really? Yeah. I think the lawsuit and the judgment were too much for them. Also, once she lost all her committee positions, she did not have any power in the community anymore, and I think that bothered her. She has been pretty isolated since the trial. I felt a complex mix of emotions about that. Part of me felt vindicated. Sharon had tried to bully me off my own property, and instead, she had ended up driving herself out of the neighborhood. But part of me felt a little sad too. It did not have to be this way. If she had just accepted the property records from the beginning, none of this would have happened. Thanks for letting me know, Robert. No problem. And Michael, the board wanted me to tell you officially that we appreciate you standing up for your property rights. Sharon's behavior was a problem for a lot of people, not just you. Things have been a lot more peaceful since she left the committees. On a sunny Saturday morning in mid-March, exactly 1 year after Sharon had first called the police on me, I backed my boat down the launch ramp without incident. The morning was crisp and beautiful, and the lake was calm. Jennifer sat in the passenger seat of the truck, and we had a cooler full of snacks and drinks for a day on the water. As I finished launching the boat and climbed behind the wheel, Jennifer leaned over and kissed my cheek. You know what? I am glad you fought this. It would have been easier to just let it go, but you stood up for what was right. Sharon taught me something important, I said, guiding the boat away from the dock. Property rights matter, community rules matter, but facts and evidence matter most of all. She wanted reality to bend to her opinions, and when it would not, she just dug in harder. That is no way to live. We spent the day cruising around Lake Geneva, anchoring in quiet coves and watching other boats pass by. At one point, we floated near the community beach area, and I could see several families enjoying the shared waterfront space. Kids were building sandcastles, people were swimming, and someone was grilling hot dogs on one of the community grills. That was the thing that Sharon had never understood. I was not trying to take anything away from the community. I was not preventing anyone from using the shared beach area. I just wanted to use my own property, the property that I had legally purchased and paid for, without being harassed about it. As the sun began setting, painting the sky orange and pink, Jennifer and I headed back toward my dock. I could see our house on the hill, warm light glowing from the windows. It looked welcoming and peaceful, exactly what a home should be. You know what the best part of all this is? Jennifer said as I maneuvered the boat into position. What is that? We get to keep living here, our home, our dock, our slice of Lake Geneva, and nobody can take that away from us. She was right. Sharon had tried to run me out, tried to intimidate me into giving up my property rights, tried to bury me in legal fees and HOA violations. Instead, I had stood my ground, proven my case, and come out the other side with everything I had started with plus a court order protecting me from future harassment. The water lapped gently against the hull of the boat as I secured it to the dock. Somewhere in the distance, I heard laughter carrying across the lake from another dock party. The community of Lakeview Heights would continue on, now hopefully with a better understanding that rules and regulations needed to be based on facts and actual legal authority, not just one person's opinions about what was fair. I helped Jennifer out of the boat and we walked up the sloped lawn toward our house, hand in hand. Behind us, the lake reflected the last rays of sunlight and my boat bobbed peacefully at its dock, my dock, on my property, just the way it should be. The following week, I was trimming some bushes near the property line when Pete walked over with his 2 kids. They were carrying fishing poles and tackle boxes. Hey Michael, we were wondering if that offer to fish off your dock was still good. Absolutely. Come on down anytime. The kids ran ahead excitedly, and Pete lingered for a moment. You know, what you did with Sharon, standing up to all that nonsense, it actually inspired a few other people in the neighborhood to push back on some of the more ridiculous HOA rules. The board is actually reviewing a lot of the compliance regulations to make sure they make sense. That is good to hear. Yeah. It turns out that when you actually examine some of these rules, a lot of them were just things Sharon had added over the years without any real justification. The board is streamlining everything, making it more reasonable. I watched Pete's kids set up their fishing gear on my dock, their faces full of concentration and excitement. This was what community was supposed to be about. Neighbors helping neighbors, sharing resources when it made sense, but respecting boundaries and property rights too. That evening, I got an email from Thomas Bradley. "Hey Michael, thought you might find this interesting. Richard Whitmore's law firm sent over the paperwork to close out the case. Everything is settled, judgment is paid, and the injunction is recorded with the court. You are officially done with this saga. Congratulations on the victory and enjoy that boat launch." I leaned back in my office chair and allowed myself a satisfied smile. It had been a long, frustrating year, but it had ended the right way. Sharon had learned that she could not bully people into submission. The HOA had learned that they needed to verify facts before taking action. And I had learned that standing up for your rights, even when it was difficult and expensive, was sometimes the only way to protect what was yours. Jennifer appeared in the doorway with 2 glasses of wine. "You look pleased with yourself. The case is officially closed, judgment paid, everything settled. So it is really over. It is really over." She handed me a glass and raised hers. "To property rights, to fighting the good fight, and to never backing down from HOA Karens who think they run the world." I clinked my glass against hers. "I will drink to that." As spring turned into summer, life in Lakeview Heights settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sharon and her husband moved out in late April, their house selling quickly to a young couple with a toddler. The new neighbors were friendly and laid back, the kind of people who waved when they drove by and did not care what time your trash bins were visible from the street. The HOA board implemented several reforms, including a requirement that any proposed fine or violation notice had to be approved by at least 2 board members before being sent out. They also established an appeals process for homeowners who felt they had been unfairly targeted. Robert told me privately that they were trying to prevent another Sharon situation from developing. I continued to use my boat launch regularly, often taking out friends and family for fishing trips or sunset cruises. Every time I backed the trailer down the ramp, I thought about that morning when Sharon had first confronted me, so certain that she was right and I was wrong. She had never been willing to examine the evidence, never been willing to admit that maybe her assumptions were incorrect. That stubborn refusal to accept reality had cost her nearly $18,000 and ultimately driven her from the neighborhood. In late June, the HOA held its annual summer barbecue, and Jennifer and I attended along with most of the neighborhood. It was a beautiful evening, and the community beach area was packed with families. Robert made a brief speech thanking everyone for a great year and noting that community participation in HOA events was at an all-time high. "We have had some challenges this year," he said diplomatically, "but I think we have come through them stronger. We have updated our policies to be more fair and more transparent, and we have worked hard to make sure that everyone feels welcome in Lakeview Heights. This is a community built on respect for each other and respect for the rules, and I think we have found a good balance." People applauded, and I noticed several neighbors glancing in my direction with small smiles. My fight with Sharon had become legendary in the community, and while I had not sought that attention, I did not mind being known as someone who would not be pushed around. Later that evening, as the sun set and kids ran around with sparklers, Patricia Morrison approached me with a proposition. "Michael, the board has been discussing this and we wanted to see if you would be interested in joining as a board member. Donald is stepping down as treasurer at the end of his term and we think you would be great for the position." I was surprised. "Really? After everything that happened?" "Especially after everything that happened. You showed that you will stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. You did your research, you understood the law, and you handled a very tough situation with grace. Those are exactly the qualities we need on this board." I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to decline to avoid any additional HOA drama. But another part of me recognized an opportunity to help shape the community in a positive direction, to make sure that future disputes were handled fairly and based on facts rather than personal vendettas. "Can I think about it and get back to you?" "Of course. The election is not until September. Just let us know." I discussed it with Jennifer that night as we sat on our back deck, watching the lights from the neighboring houses reflect off the lake. "What do you think?" I asked. "Should I join the board?" She considered it carefully. "If you do, you have to promise me one thing." "What is that?" "Do not become an HOA Karen yourself. Do not let the little bit of authority go to your head," I laughed. "I promise. If I ever start carrying around a binder full of complaints and measuring people's grass with a ruler, you have my permission to stage an intervention. Deal." I ended up accepting the position and was elected HOA treasurer in September with overwhelming support from the community. My first order of business was to propose a complete review of the fine structure, ensuring that penalties were proportional to violations, and that homeowners had clear guidelines about what was and was not allowed. Over the following months, the board worked together to create a more welcoming, reasonable community environment. We eliminated some of the more ridiculous rules that Sharon had championed, like the restriction on decorative wreaths and the requirement that trash bins be completely invisible from the street within 10 minutes of pickup. We kept the important regulations about property maintenance and community standards, but we added flexibility and common sense to the enforcement. One of my favorite changes was the creation of a Good Neighbor initiative, where we recognized homeowners who went above and beyond to help others in the community. The first recipient was Pete, who had organized a volunteer group to help elderly residents with yard work and home repairs. The second recipient was Maria, who had started a community garden project on a vacant lot that the HOA owned. By the time winter rolled around again, Lakeview Heights felt like a completely different place. The anxiety and tension that had characterized Sharon's enforcement regime had been replaced with a sense of genuine community spirit. People were not worried about getting fined for minor infractions. They were focused on actually enjoying their homes and their neighborhood. On a cold December afternoon, almost 2 years after Sharon had first called the police on me, I was in my garage winterizing my boat when Robert stopped by. "Hey Michael, got a minute?" "Sure, what is up?" "I wanted to thank you, actually." When all that stuff happened with Sharon, I did not handle it well. I should have looked into the property records before calling that emergency meeting. I let her push the board around because it was easier than confronting her. "Robert, you do not need to apologize." Sharon was very good at making people feel like they were in the wrong even when they were not. Maybe, but I was the board president. I should have been better. Anyway, watching how you handled everything, standing your ground but not being vindictive about it, it taught me something about leadership. You could have made Sharon's life miserable after you won that lawsuit, but you did not. You just wanted to be left alone to use your property. That was all I ever wanted. I know. And that is why I am really glad you joined the board. You actually care about fairness, not just about enforcing rules for the sake of enforcing them. After Robert left, I stood in my garage looking at my boat, covered and secure for the winter. It seemed like such a small thing, the right to launch a boat from my own property. But it had become a symbol of something larger. The importance of standing up for yourself, of not letting bullies control your life, of insisting that facts and evidence matter more than someone's personal opinions. Sharon had probably never understood that. In her mind, she had been doing the right thing, protecting the community from someone who was breaking the rules. She had been so convinced of her own righteousness that she had never stopped to consider that maybe, just maybe, she was wrong. That kind of certainty, that unwillingness to examine your own assumptions, could be dangerous. It had cost Sharon nearly $20,000 and her home in a community where she had lived for years. It had damaged relationships and created unnecessary conflict. All because she could not accept the simple fact that I owned my waterfront property. As I locked up the garage and walked back to my house, I felt grateful for how everything had turned out. I still had my home, my property, my boat launch. I had gained new friends in the neighborhood and earned respect from people who had seen me stand up to unreasonable demands. and I had learned valuable lessons about the importance of documentation, the power of persistence, and the satisfaction that comes from fighting for what is right. The lake was frozen now, covered with a thin layer of ice that would thicken as winter progressed. In a few months, spring would return, the ice would melt, and I would launch my boat once again from my private ramp. Sharon would be long gone, living somewhere else, hopefully learning to accept that the world did not always conform to her expectations. But I would still be here in my home in Lakeview Heights, enjoying every inch of the waterfront property that I owned, just as I had every legal right to do.